No, I wasn't really sure what those people were doing in the bar, but when we were there in Geneva, Kirsty and I, it was very late, and I'm not sure what those humans were doing in the bar. What was it, Bar Leopard? Was that the
Leopard bar, Ryan? I don't know if. Yeah, one time you went to Geneva. I didn't hear about this, but
one time I was in Geneva.
Got you. Well,
I think you were there.
I was there. Yeah, it was a great time.
You were there.
It was for the World Forum. It's beautiful. It was a really good event.
There we go. It was a nice place.
There we
good
go.
umbrellas.
I was not given the correct instructions, and I was in Geneva, New York.
New York.
Lovely this time of year.
A little frigid. That's my thoughts. Welcome everyone to another Coffee Talk with Serge. Our beloved Audra is off at SANS training today, so we have brought in the EMEA specialist, Ms. Kirsty, who is coming live from the south of France, I believe. Is that where you're coming in the yellow
That's
room?
where I'm tanning right now. Yeah. So obviously sad that Audra can't join us, but I'm going to do my best to try and do a smidge of the job that she does, and delighted to be joining you from Europe. I'm bringing a European-friendly time zone and perspective to what we're going to be talking about today.
Exactly. And Mick and I are drinking coffee. You will have cognac in a mug because you're classy. That's the.
I should say this is
one does south of France.
It's tea with milk, so I'm representing the Brits, but it's in a Deutschland mug. So any German folks
on
the
the
call
south
as well.
Of France.
Yeah, could I be more European right now?
Well, you said British, so no.
Yeah,
I mean, to kind of that tea needs to be in a different container. You need to take it out of the stein and put it in a different. Anywho. We have a lovely show today. We're focusing on public sector because tomorrow is Splunk's GovSummit, where we focus primarily on U.S. public sector, but also all sorts of different public sector activities. Myself, Mick, and Kirsty all came from the different governments that we lived in, and we've done different things there. So we're going to have a whole bunch of stories today focusing on public sector. Then we're going to do a deep dive on private-public sharing. And then we will do an interview with Gary and Juliana that I recorded right now live, as you'll be very able to tell clearly. And should take about 30, 40 minutes as usual, I think is what we're doing. There's also a high chance that we screwed up our meeting room and we might have surprising guests pop in here in lovely Tyson's Corner, Virginia. But we also have our wonderful producer, speaking of public sector, Drew Church is back from his foray into active duty military service. And we're very happy to have him back. And Drew, why don't you roll the news clip? Let's see what we have here. So Kirsty, you just recently wrote a blog, did a webinar about some exciting things called NIS2, I believe. The T is silent and not actually there. Could you tell Mick and I, who know absolutely nothing about this, what is going on in Europe? Why do you need more regulation? I feel like this has just been a crux of the issue in Europe.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, we do love a good piece of regulation. So everyone knows the GDPR, but get ready to hear about NIS2. So have you heard of NIS? Well, NIS1, but the original NIS, I guess, just the Network Information Security system. So we've got now NIS2. So the NIS Directive, Network and Information Security Directive, which just got formally adopted by Parliament a couple of weeks ago. So I asked if it was a bit gauche to plug my own blog, but I wrote a blog for Splunk and we had a fireside chat, like you said. And it's just covering kind of important entities in EU member states and making sure that they are more resilient. So it's kind of going to be a big deal for a lot of sectors in the economy.
How is that, from a practical point of view, is there practical outcomes on this, or is it more strategic guidance? You should just do better, or is it you need to have passwords changed every 30 days?
So you're asking if it's outcome-based or if it's kind of prescriptive. And I think, I hear you. So at the European level, it's just got to be set at the European level and then put into country legislation. So across the 27 member states, they've all got to transpose it. So how it will actually look and how it will be regulated is still to be decided. But there are some key things that people should be quite worried about, I suppose, that are contained in those obligations. And the one that really hit me was a stricter instant reporting deadline. So you now have to give an early warning within 24 hours of an incident that's happening. So 24 hours, pretty tight turnaround, and 72 hours for a fuller report. And that's really going to test quite a lot of organizations in terms of how quickly they can respond to those requests.
Now we've talked a lot about this before because Biden had a thought about doing this before.
Sort of, right. And,
yeah.
There were several entities in the U.S. that were like, this is not a good idea for me. It actually makes me work hard, and I will have to work harder to try and get around it. So it was kind of astute. The 24-hour thing is really interesting because we've had the same discussion where when exactly does an incident start? So if I have 24 hours, the incident really, it couldn't start until I actually have all the evidence, collected all the logs, and by that time, you're way past that threshold. So I'm curious how it's implemented. You mentioned all 27 EU member states are involved, sitting down at the table. What happens, password hygiene, bad patching, something like that? If there's an incident, what's going to happen? Like if it's prescriptive or it's outcome-based, let's say you have a bad outcome, what's going to happen to me, Mick Q CISO?
Yeah, I know. So it's really interesting because I say this, when does an alert become a proper incident, right? Like at what point are you going to start that clock? And I think that's going to be quite a broad definition, honestly. But at the C-level, it's quite interesting because this is maybe one of the first times we've seen C-level staff will have these responsibilities, and they could even be suspended or prohibited if they are part of a non-compliance incident, as well as there being like really high fines. So kind of on the level of GDPR for large entities, 2% of your turnover or up to 10 million euros,
oh, wow.
which usually people take notice. Yeah, it's a big stick. And I say that a lot.
Euros, that's like what, $80?
No, it's like 10 million right now. It's wonderful.
Okay, you stop it now because the exchange rate is a sore spot. But yeah, I think it's pretty big in any case. Whatever's going on, it's pretty big. And it's kind of a real motivator, I guess. Like a lot of governments don't like regulating. They just do it when the market's not doing what they hope. So this is hopefully really going to push people to actually doing the security stuff they should have always done.
And this is our ignorance, really. So like what you said is the EU is pushing this down, and then the member states will enact the actual regulations themselves. Who gets the moolah? Yeah. Like when someone is naughty, does it go back to the EU or does it go to the Netherlands specifically?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it goes to like the country and that regulator, but I honestly don't know. It would depend how they put it into law. So yeah, it would depend. But I think it's going to be interesting because that's the limit. That's as much as they can do. But for smaller countries, they might decide that that's not a reasonable fine. It's just that the EU has set this provision that you can go up to this. And some things have to be included, like the 24-hour, 72-hour obligations. The kind of issue with NIS, the original, was that it wasn't specific enough. So a lot of countries, when they put it in their own regulation, they like softened it slightly. So depending on what country you were in, there were like 20 entities covered or more than 10,000. So that's crazy, right? So they're trying to be a lot stricter on the kind of sectors that are covered and the scope of those as well.
Yeah, I know. Like, I think the UK has had a long success with this, with the ICO, and like it's something we haven't really done in the US as much. But for especially the American audience who don't know the ICO, you obviously have a long experience being formerly UK Gov. Can you kind of go into what they did and how they were able to implement that success?
Oh man, the Information Commissioner's Office. Yeah, so they dealt with GDPR breaches and that kind of stuff. So anytime you had a breach, it had to be reported to the ICO, and they would like help you work out if it was kind of negligence or if it was could happen to anyone type thing. And then the idea is to work with you, right? To like help you improve and fix the problems that you've got and just help mitigate the kind of impact. But I'm kind of surprised you don't have anything like that in the US. Like what's the closest thing you have in the US? Anything like
Vendors, yeah, we don't really. Yeah. It's the federalized system kind of like one of the things I distinctly remember was when I worked for a company that had a large UK presence, and we were terrified of losing a laptop that was unencrypted because we had customer data on there, and ICO could leverage just a huge fine. But then I remember researching it and finding out like the ICO was fining internal like local governments for losing stuff, and that was just something we would never you'd never see the U.S. federal government like charging like the state of Arizona for something.
Or like if there was a Secret Service agent that left a laptop in a car or something and then reported.
Never happened.
There would be no fine that got handed down, I imagine.
Like
if it ever did.
An FBI agent dancing in a country bar and popping a shooting. Nothing happened.
Leaving a PDB in a hotel room. Something like these things, there'll never be a big fine or something like that. So it's interesting to see the different approaches. And it sounds like it's entirely more successful via the ICO, the way they're doing things.
Yeah, we don't have it at a federal level, but California actually has teeth. Like they put, that's the 6th largest economy in the world. When they put in regulations around California citizens, basically everyone in the world actually has to comply. because of the data
Everything it
privacy.
touches, yeah.
Exactly. So I guess but we don't have anything at a higher level that I know of.
That's the same thing for GDPR, right? Like lots of people think that only applies to Europe, but it applies to every European citizen. And if that European citizen lives abroad, no matter where they are in the world, they are still protected by GDPR. So that forced a lot of companies to act as though every citizen, or every customer they had was a European citizen. So it sounds like a similar thing, which is nice. I mean, it shows the power of, I'm not one for like legislate everything, but it's a good way to incentivize when the market's not doing what it should in terms of security.
Absolutely. That's the whole point of regulation in government, right? Speaking of regulations in governments, we have a story about NSA in the US has come up with something around information collaboration environment with industry. And apparently they took a lot of inspiration from NCSE in the UK for the Industry 100, which is something I know you know quite a bit about, Kirsty. For those who haven't seen, we're not going to dig too far into this, but there's a lot of exciting things about the CCC NSA kind of collaboration that's going on in the US. My understanding, kind of looking at it, it seems partly inspired by JCDC, partly inspired by Industry 100. So what I want to learn more about today is the Industry 100 and NCSE. Kirsty, once again, educate us. We're just two dumb yokels here in DC with a lurking research.
I can't help but feel like that guest host that swoops in, tells you everything, and just leaves. So the I-100 allegedly came from this story where a politician was shown around NCSC's head offices, and it's just freshly open, so it's a bit empty. And they looked around and said, "Why is this so empty? We should have 100 of industry employees in here, like collaborating with us." And hence, Industry 100 was born. Don't know how true that is, but the idea is that people who are in industry go to NCSC and they're seconded there for a part of their time, and it can be a day a month or it can be 2 weeks a month. It's really between the NCSC and the organization, and they learn from the NCSC. They help with policy, provide some industry realism, and they can take back those skills into their organization as well. So it's a proven really good public-private partnership that we have going on. So is it similar to what NSA are going to start up?
No, probably no.
We have a hard time in the US with this because there's laws against companies providing free services to the government, and this would fall under that purview. I think they're more looking at it, can we have a cleared area for sharing of data where everyone is trusting and kind of going through that methodology of like we're all doing better, but we can't actually do they can't provide people into the government and they might be able to do out of the government into private industry, but we can't do private industry into the government.
Right. That and a lot of the hurdles, at least in my experience throughout my career in the government, the legal hurdles to overcome before there's any kind of information sharing that can happen. We're talking, a memorandum of understanding, memorandum of agreement, sharing agreements, sanitizing information, anonymizing information. All these things are taking place. I think from what, this is a great idea. I think it's fantastic that finally realizing, hey, sharing information works at all levels. Once we, and even on that cleared side, when there's information, there's IOCs, there's data that can be shared at a classified level, getting all the right folks at the table that need to be there is super important. And even at the unclassified level, I know, the public-private partnerships, DHS, CISA, recently, I think there's the 10 listening sessions that are going on around the country. And I think part of that is going to feed into, hey, sharing works, at any level. And I'm glad to see the kind of momentum going forward in that.
Actually, it's really interesting on the classified, unclassified level, because sometimes you might think that something is, classified information. That's how you could only possibly know about the IOC. And then it comes in through industry, and it allows this whole better conversation about how you can share that intelligence, how you can share that information, because actually it's well known. And I think sometimes government folks can get a bit jumpy about over-classifying things. So it really helps bridge that gap as well.
The government has never overclassified anything. I don't know what you mean.
We had a whole thing in the US where they made like a ruling that an indicator of compromise without context was inherently unclassified. But then people would put them into classified reporting without changing any of the headers. So it was then classified, even though it was supposed to be unclassified.
So you get a classified report, it's a bunch of data, and then there's like a little page break. Hey, this is the unclassified section. These are the IOCs, a little tear line, all right? Otherwise, you've got to jump through a bunch of hoops to say, hey, Mother, may I, can you declassify this IP address?
Or you just go on to proofpoint.com and you find the IP address. You're
Yeah.
like, oh, it turns out it's citizen.
It's right
Fine.
here too. Parallel reconstruction, just like Bellingcat. So
Yep.
it's always been really, really interesting. Just from as an analyst, we always got super frustrated. Like, hey, this report's useless for the most part. So the declassification of information, I think, with the commercial industry kind of getting more visibility as much as government, those partnerships become crucially important. We've all seen like the attribution minor mistakes where, vendor A sees this, vendor B sees this, and they don't match up, but they're overlapping TTPs. And I think having the government being able to put all those folks together, I think it's going to be great in the overall run for security.
I'm hearing good things, so let's hope it works out. Speaking of good things, we just had a exercise with NATO recently. Crossed swords, I believe, is the term. I always want to say broken swords and like muddled shields or something. But there's two major exercises that NATO does for cyber every year. One's red team, one's blue team, and we just did one in, I believe, Tallinn. And we had a wonderful gentleman, Floris Landon, who's part of a kind of a Serge cousin. He went out on Serge's behalf, and we
crossed all the swords.
Crossed all this. Nope, we're not doing that.
So many types and just not time. Too many jokes. Just keep going.
Too many jokes. Yeah, it's I don't know what they're thinking on that one, but I do love the exercise. And the concept of doing red teaming right now is especially poignant. We've had a lot of questions. I know when I went to Europe, 3 months ago for work, not Geneva, this was somewhere else.
You were in Geneva?
I was in Geneva.
Wow.
It's come up before. But yeah, well, you were there. We were at the Leopard Bar.
Oh, I remember.
A lot of the questions I had in EMEA was around Russia and Ukraine. That was a lot of the concerns. And we don't have them as much, like we did right when the invasion first started, but now they've kind of died off. But obviously it's much more relevant for folks in EMEA. For your world, the people you're talking to, the customers you're talking to, and just the back chatter you're getting, what are your thoughts on this? Like, as people are looking at Russia, Ukraine, is this still really relevant in terms of an active threat to customers, especially public sector in EMEA?
Yeah, I mean, I remember someone talking about the Shields Up effort and saying, what on earth do people think we were doing before? So some people took it as like, we're just doing the same thing we've always done. And, it's a different type of threat. But at the end, we're still trying to defend against it as best we can. I think, obviously, we've all seen in the news, the war is lasting a lot longer than we thought it would. And it's really difficult now because we're in this kind of sustained, you can't sprint forever, right? So now it's becoming more of this marathon. And it's still very much top of mind for a lot of people I speak to. But I think it's just kind of, it's almost bad, but it's kind of blending in with the other types of threat. Like it's just, and now it's become part of the background. It's become part of that constant landscape to deal with. I mean, I don't know if you're hearing similar things in the US, but maybe just geography makes it feel closer here. I don't know.
We're pretty much moved on, I think. Yeah, we're, in January, the start of the year, it was top of mind for everyone. And I think as the year has gone on, we're still aware that it's going on and all the conflict that comes with it. But to your point, I think it has blended in to all the noise that's going on the internet pretty much every day. I do think that exercises like NATO, when they're doing adversary emulation, are super important because, like we just said, it blends into the noise, but it's still different enough where you're adjusting your defenses and your responses to it, and just having the ability to practice that at such a large scale. Because, emulating something here at Splunk would be easy to do, or an 8,000 person company. Emulating adversary behavior at NATO is a completely different exercise, because what does NATO touch? I mean, it's pretty much everywhere and everything, and be able to respond to that and have your defenses ready and have everything, resilience, I guess, having that resilient plan. Look at that, tying it all together.
I'm interested by it. Yeah, he got an extra RSC this quarter.
I got 3 days.
There we go. The thing I find interesting about it, when I was in the military, we would do joint force exercises with foreign militaries, and like the most ridiculous things would trip us up, right? Like you're trying to work with Australians and it turns out they have a different language. Who knew? Or their plugs are different, or the radio frequencies don't work, or all these sort of areas there. So I think it's going to be really interesting. Like these are super important because there's going to be questions like, oh, the Americans use Splunk, but this other team is using Sentinel, and like we're both facing Russian APT threats. How do you get detections across both? Or, hey, we're able to ingest 20 types of IOCs, but they're able to bring in 300. And,
inches? What is that?
Yeah,
that's what happens. It's just
and all of a sudden now you have a beagle that's 20 meters inside of Mars, right? That's I think
yeah, centimeters, inches, mugs. It's all a nightmare. Interoperability.
Who can we blame for that? What single country can we blame for the imperial measurement?
I'm not naming names, but you know,
I can't think of one.
I don't know. I mean, we work in meters now, so I don't know what your problem is.
Inflation. Inflation.
Where do the cars go? Do they go kilometers an hour or miles per hour?
Okay, so in cars it's miles, but I have to say everything else is like liters, kilos, centimeters now. So yeah, we're moving on.
And
we're getting there.
How much do you weigh, Kirsty? How much do you weigh in British
Rude
measurements?
question, but it's definitely in kilos.
Oh, not in stones and penny whackers or whatever it is. It's,
I don't know. Yeah, it could be something like that. But yeah, no, I mean, I think it's right. To come back to NATO, I think it's right that there are these cultural clashes. There's kind of, difficult, even just like ways of working, right? It's not just the technology and at the bits and bytes level that you're not using the same protocols to talk to each other or having the same tools. It's kind of even just the cultural way of working. It's completely different. I used to work in a European setting where the French colleagues I had would ask me to translate what the British people were saying. And they didn't mean into French, they meant into clearer English, because the way Brits ask for something is very, very polite, to the point where someone said, they asked if they wanted them to work on a project. And they said, if you have time, that would be great, but you don't worry. And they were like, well, do they want me to do it or do they want me to leave it alone? And they had no clue which of those two it was. So, they want you to do it. They just don't feel they can ask. So there's a lot of stuff on that people level as well, which is part of this whole exercising thing, right? It brings all those aspects together.
And they brought companies like Splunk there and other private companies, which is a perfect segue into our deep dive. Drew, please roll clip.
And now we talk about things that just happen to be on our minds with who's ever here, because we made this up before I knew who'd accept my meeting invite.
And Kirsty, you accepted the meeting invite today. Audra did not. She canceled. So
it's hard, isn't it?
No, she accepted it. She just didn't show up.
Yeah.
She would say, I'll be there, and I'm not going to be there.
So
classic
private-public partnerships. We are doing a lot of those. It's one of the major planks that we work on here at Surge. You and I have been working a lot with the World Economic Forum and also other EU kind of as we start expanding globally with Surge, looking at different areas. You had a lot of experience in private-public partnership when you were in the government. What are your thoughts on it? What are the areas that you see people being able to succeed in getting out of it?
It's such a hard question. How long do we have? We just have a little bit of time to. Okay, I one piece of advice, and I say this all the time because someone said it to me when I worked in government, was that government always goes with the problem, right? Like the exact kind of, we want this particular solution, right? And they're never going with like a wider, here's the situation we're in, here's the outcome we need to get to, how would you go about it in private sector? And I think that really has stuck with me, and it's advice I give all the time, that if you're able to share more of the context, more of the problem, you get a better collaboration, right? Like just with your normal colleagues. So that's one piece of advice that I really would stick down everyone's throats if I could, would be share the problem, not the request for a single solution. I don't know if that rings true with your experience as well. That's one of the things I found time and time again.
Mick, you've been leading kind of our JCDC experience. Like, are you finding that to be a true world there?
It's really, really unique. I mean, I completely agree with everything you said. It's the JCDC's environment it's so, I guess, different from previous iterations of sharing, and I do think that it gives more, I guess, a voice or a participation from entities that ordinarily wouldn't be there. In my past experiences, your larger vendors are always going to have a seat at the table because the visibility they have, but the smaller companies that don't necessarily have the staffing, the resources to combat a lot of the threats benefit greatly from that JCDC partnerships and alliances. So I think that those partnerships are huge. And I think it feels like a lot of the red tape between public and private sharing has really, really decreased over the past, I guess, 2 years, maybe 3. And it's really a credit to Director Easterly and her staff over there. It's such a great job of getting everyone involved.
But I would say, like in the U.S., CISA really focuses on their mission is protecting the U.S. federal government and also citizens.
Yes.
But they're really focusing on
US
the big government and big corporations. Where I know where you used to work over at NCSE, they have a slightly different mission and approach. What do you think are kind of the tweaks there that are different?
Yeah, well, it's nice because the NCSE had this tagline, which was easy to remember, which is to make the UK the safest place to live and work online. And if you think about that, that's massive, right? So that's everything from government, big companies, like making sure people, like average citizens, can use the internet safely, work there safely, not get scammed by. But it was really everything from schools, charities, government, and citizens, right? So huge remits. And it's a nice tagline because it does easily explain what they try to do, but it also explains why they really need to leverage private industry, right? Because there's just a huge gearing problem. There's not that many people in government, in the NCSE, with the technical skill that you need to be able to have this wider impact on the ecosystem. So that's what you see with private sector, right? If you can partner properly, you get this huge amplifier effect. And you see it in all kinds of things, really, like helping to write policy or co-developing technical guidance or prototyping things. It's really needed. So yeah, it's a totally different remit. Just maybe exactly like you described, but more. Just like all the citizens, and it's the most vulnerable citizens as well, right? Like down to like at schools, right up to the elderly. Like you're just thinking of this whole broad range of age, backgrounds, cultural dynamics, all that sort of stuff you're trying to work with. So huge.
I remember when we met your former boss over there, Dr. Levy, and we were talking about smart toasters and just the concept, like how do you incentivize a manufacturer to make a smart toaster that can't be weaponized into a botnet? And it's something I hadn't really thought of because we don't tend to look at incentivization. We tend to look at regulation for that. But I like that tweak of like, let's have people make the right decisions because they want to, rather than forcing them to because of the regulations.
I will bribe you to secure by design.
Yeah. Like, wouldn't it be great if people are like, I want to buy this thing because it's safer for my family rather than this other thing, which is not, versus, oh, we have to have this because somebody said we needed to. Which,
yeah.
Or I'll pay.
It's really good because if you think about this, some is regulation and some is exactly that, like just making people aware of the choices they're making or genuinely excited by security or genuinely interested in doing the right kind of choice rather than just, oh, this comes with free Netflix, I guess I'll do that,
But they're doing it with the industry, right? Like they're not just coming out with these rules or these methods, like they're actually bringing people in to actually create this, which is why the private-public partnership discussion kicks off, right? What are some of the, if you had to pick like one of the biggest things that you saw that was exciting that's come out of your time there around private-public partnership, what would it be?
Do you know, I'd have to say, yeah, this is crazy, isn't it? I mean, so there's a lot that gets done. I would probably say like IoT safety, like device security, that's one of the best things, and it goes to smart toasters, right? Like why would that be incentivized? And it started with technical standards, and then it's actually just passed the Royal Assent, I think. So the bill is now going to be law, where you cannot sell in the UK a smart device if it doesn't meet 3 very basic criteria. You're going to laugh when I say these, because the first one is just no default passwords, so like no more admin, and the second is to have a vulnerability
that's a 0 day here, I'm just saying it.
The second is a vulnerability disclosure policy, and the third is to say how long you're going to patch your device for. So it's actually not saying it has to be at least this amount of time. It's just at the point of sale, you have to say, I'm not going to patch it, or I am going to patch it. And then consumers can understand what they're paying for and make a better decision. And you only get a certain standard of device getting to the market. I know it sounds like maybe not that glamorous, but it has a massive impact on the ecosystem if you think about it, just those basic things. So that was really cool. And the reason it worked so well is
I wonder about a lot of these smart devices, like you talked about with the patching, because there's like, I know people are still running refrigerators from 1975. And so I'm imagining some of these new smart refrigerators with like Windows XP going on for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And like, that's just not going to go away.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you're a security professional, so would you get rid of your fridge just because it's not being patched anymore, but it still works as a fridge? And you work in security.
I'm the worst person for security stuff after the OPM breaches, everything. I'm like,
Stop, Karen.
I'm just screwed. So I'll buy all the smart things. Like, who needs a firewall at home? Just run straight off the cable modem. Like, it's fine. It will all work out.
It's not like whether my PII is in a database, it's how many databases and where they're, it doesn't matter.
Those IP cameras are really nice from Huawei, and I appreciate their networking
The
gear.
zoom on those is amazing.
It's incredible. Sometimes they zoom without me even knowing it. It's just...
So now it's just all about convenience and ease of use. Like, my smart fridge, I'd probably keep in airplane mode. Maybe I couldn't use and see what's inside of it, a little display or something, but I would be curious to see what happens, like in my experience, breaking a lot of healthcare things. Hey, we're stopping Windows XP, we're not supporting it anymore. And that really put a dent in a lot of industry and medical industry, because these devices, hey, we have to have this OS, we have to have admin rights. So those constant adjustments are going to be interesting to see, especially with IoT.
Now, we could keep talking about this for a very long time, but we've buried the lead with an incredible interview with Gary, Steele, and Juliana. So I'm going to pitch over to the most handsome interviewer of all time.
Gary Steele?
And no, that's the interviewee.
He is a great man.
He's a man of steel, as the investors say. So, Drew, would you please play our actually, I'm just going to go into the other room and do a quick wardrobe change.
You want to change real quick?
Yeah, and then I'm going to interview Juliana and Gary live. So we'll get that going here any second.
And thank you, Ryan. I appreciate the handoff for the most exciting segment of the day, Burning Questions from Kovar. We are joined today by the lovely Juliana and Gary. And before I butcher any sort of introductions about that, Juliana, for the audience who may not know you, as they well should, could you go briefly over your background and why you might be appearing on Burning Questions today?
Why, sure. Thank you, Ryan Kovar. Juliana Vida. In brief, I'm the Chief Strategy Advisor for Splunk's public sector. Some people call me an evangelist, a technology evangelist, and I come from a full career as a military officer and a civil servant before coming to Splunk. So looking forward to the burning questions and everything else that's on tap for us today.
Wonderful. And Gary, I don't think you need much of an introduction, but just in case there's anyone out there who's been under a rock, please.
I am the new CEO of Splunk. I've been on board a little over 7 months now and loving every moment of it.
Wonderful. And for those who don't know, I'm Ryan Kovar, who just handed myself off to myself for this very segment. Before I came to Splunk, I had about 20 years of public sector experience as well, serving in the US Navy and UK public sector and a variety of other places like DARPA. So I can't thank you two enough for being the warm-up act tomorrow for myself and my team at GovSummit. And one of the reoccurring themes that we keep having at Splunk and just globally, as I've been traveling the world talking to customers, is around cyber resiliency. Now, Juliana, you and I know that we've been doing cyber resiliency in the DoD for 20 years. When I was in the Navy, we had to deal with things like if a missile hit the port side of the ship, would we have the ability to continue network operations on the other side of the ship, on the starboard side? Later on, it turned into if the Cisco router went down due to adversary action, would we be able to get the flight plans out for the Gulf area of responsibility? With the new update of the NIS publication, it feels like everywhere I go, I'm hearing about cyber resiliency. So, Gary, starting with you, could you kind of define what you think cyber resiliency is to ourselves, to our customers, and why it's so important?
Yeah, I think this is the top priority for everybody today, is how do you ensure that no matter what happens, that you can deal with the issue, you can detect, you can respond, and you can drive the resilience across the organization. We do obviously a lot of work in the public sector. We do a lot of work with commercial organizations, and everyone is talking about resiliency these days.
And Juliana, with your background in public sector and your, the work you're doing constantly with our public sector customers, how does this align with what you're seeing and doing?
Well, I think similar to what Gary was talking about and what you were saying, that cyber resiliency is everywhere. I would just say similar to, mental health is health, cybersecurity is security, cyber resilience is resilience. It's business resilience, mission resilience. It's the world we live in that's so digitized that truly means that every part of a business or an organization, particularly for the public sector, we're organizations, not for-profit businesses. Every single element of organizations and agencies now needs to be looking at and enhancing their ability to execute their mission on this cyber resiliency, because it is part and parcel to every system we use and every decision that we make.
Makes sense. And, for the public sector world, the one that we came from, APT tends to be the ones that we think of a lot when regarding to disrupting resiliency. Now, Gary, I've always had a bit of a crush on FirstPoint because I think they've always done phenomenal APT work, and it's obviously been something that you've been dealing with for your last 20 years. You met with about 100 plus customers since you've been here, the CISOs that you're around. How do you think the APT landscape has changed since COVID and the Russian-Ukraine conflict in this lens of cyber resiliency?
I think in this uncertain geopolitical environment that we're living in, I think everyone is on top concern, top priority, because no one really knows what will happen. Will there be broader spillover from the actions in Ukraine? I don't think any of us know. And I think the most important thing that everyone can do is to be ready for what could happen and to ensure that that resiliency is in place if there are events that we need to deal with. I just think there's just a level of uncertainty today that's just the world we're living in. And we have to be able to build those defenses that enable us to be resilient no matter what happens.
Yeah, I can say when I've been in Europe the last couple of months, talking to customers has come up quite a bit. One of the big questions I've had is, are the Russians, why haven't they been bigger? Why haven't they done more here? Why haven't they done more there? And it's, part of this is area of, how they're trying to restrain operations, how they're not, but it's been a fascinating area. And one of the customers that really talked about this a lot when I've been traveling, Juliana, of course, is public sector. And now that you're focused on them from the other side of the fence, how do you think they've adapted to these new challenges, Juliana, especially with the movement to the cloud? Something I never thought I would see organizations like the US government saying we have a 1-year plan to move, and now they're like, we're doing it in 6 months.
Yes. So that's actually the biggest change that I've seen, is that things that literally 7-8 years ago, when I was still in the Pentagon and in those meetings with the CIOs of the services and across the DoD, at that time it was, the DoD will never go to commercial cloud. Forget it. Don't even come talk to us. And now look how things have changed. So that's one thing, is the adoption of commercial technologies that have the right security levels and have the right certifications. The second thing is an openness of sharing across and even within organizations, learning from each other, talking to each other, and with industry. That was another thing that not even a decade ago was kind of verboten. At a certain level, there was an expectation that you and the DoD will not spend your time talking to a vendor or to industry. And now, thank God, that's different, because that's where the collaboration and the partnership, that's where the continued evolution and modernization will come.
And we've seen this private-public partnership expand in just the last 2 years. Serge has been one of the liaisons for Splunk for something called JCDC, which I think a lot of the viewers know. Gary, you were just talking about these subjects in Aspen, in New York, on behalf of the Aspen Cyber Summit. What are your thoughts on these private-public partnerships?
Yeah, I'm a big believer that the cyber industry needs to be cooperating with the public sector organizations. And I think the work that Ryan, you and your team are doing with JCDC is a really good example of that. And what I'm excited about is our ability, if something comes out as CISA, some big vulnerability or something, we can help operationalize that and drive that out to all of our customers, so everyone's not unpacking what CISA is telling them, and that we can be a really good partner, engaged and cooperating, given this world we live in. As Juliana was talking about this move to cloud, it's awesome, but attack surface is huge right now. So with that broad attack surface, I think we all need to be thinking broadly about resilience and how we can cooperate to be a good partner with public sector organizations to drive better outcomes and better resilience. So I'm just frankly a big fan, and I think I feel like we're at the beginning of our journey in terms of public-private cooperation, but I think we're making some really important steps, and I really appreciate all the work that Ryan, you're doing in your team in cooperation through JCDC.
It's really been phenomenal to me. Like I said, coming from the government, Juliana, you hit on it exactly. Like, we were never incentivized to work with private sector. And I will say also partly the world has changed, where before the government had all the answers. Now the private sector has a lot more of the information than they used to. So everyone has to share across, but there's still I would say a very specific difference when I look at how I would defend a commercial entity and a public sector entity. I think there's unique challenges and there's unique missions. Juliana or Gary, do you feel the same? Do you think the public sector does have unique challenges, or we can just paint a broad brush across them both and call it done?
I'll let Juliana go first.
Thanks, Gary. Absolutely challenges that are unique. And I would just start with the stakes are high. The stakes of, the interests of the public sector and the things that governments and agencies do and protect and provide. There's not a lot of room for error. Now, you could make that same argument for a lot of the major businesses around the world, but when we're talking about national defense, national security, providing water and utilities and all of those kinds of things, the stakes are pretty high, and the public interest and the inspection from across the world is always on. There's never a relaxation in watching what is happening in the public sector, and I think that just adds a whole nother level of urgency and we better get this right element that doesn't persist across the majority of the private sector. But Gary, you have of course a broader view across the private sector than I do, but I think that's a really unique piece of the public sector that we definitely focus on here at Splunk.
For sure. And I think I 100% agree with you that the stakes are higher. And the way I look at it is Splunk needs to be a very good partner to the US government and other governments around the world where we can help drive that resilience. And so, I'm very excited about the work we're doing. And I think it's really important to have that cooperative relationship with the US government. And I think we're at the beginning of that journey, not the end of that journey. I think we're at the very beginning, and there's more that can be done because I am 100% convinced that the threat environment is not going to get better anytime soon. And so we need to have arms linked and cooperate to drive better outcomes.
I don't disagree. And we've been seeing this, we've started off with a lot of US-centric government partnerships, but we're actually expanding. Actually, one of our co-hosts today, Kirsty Paine, is formerly of the UK public sector as well. And she's also our fellow for the World Economic Forum in Geneva. So we're really expanding that basis to see this bigger global view. Now, we have one question before we move on to the quiz section of the day. This is Juliana's, and I'm very excited by this. What I would love for you both to answer, go in the depths of your soul here, which movie or TV series has the most fun representation of the public sector, and +5 points if it is a Navy reference, Gary, as Juliana and I are both former squids. NCIS, Down Periscope, Battleship, Run Silent, Run Deep. Any one of those, of course, will be a winner. Juliana, we'll give Gary a second to think here.
Okay.
What are you going for?
Yeah, maybe NCIS. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll take it. It's a Navy reference. Juliana, yours.
Come on, I have to go with Top Gun, and that includes the first one and Maverick. I was a helicopter pilot, so we loves us some fighter pilots and, making jokes about them. And Gary, I don't know if you know this, but this is considered shooting their watch down when they tell these stories about there I was. So going with Top Gun all day.
My only experience with pilots on the aircraft carrier was they used to drive golf balls off the back, and we could get balls for shotguns by shooting the balls out of the air. So it was a little bit of a dual purpose use there. So it was quite a bit of fun. In typical Surge Coffee Talk fashion, we're going to wrap up with a bit of a game where the points are completely meaningless and you win absolutely nothing other than fame or damnation. Cyber is well known for wonky acronyms and ridiculous company names, and we're not going to point to Splunk here for that one. So we're going to ask you a list of terms, and your job is to determine who is real or fake. And our lovely production elves in the background will probably put some sort of counter on to see who wins. And we're going to go through the first one. Juliana, we'll start with you as the winner of the movie challenge. 0-day hash. Find the hash before your machines are compromised. Real or fake?
I'm going to say fake.
Gary?
Fake.
That is absolutely real. Fun fact. There we go. Online Operation Kill Chain describes the steps threat actors go through to acquire a foothold online, disguise their assets, and evade detection. Juliana?
I think that's real.
Gary?
Yeah, I do real.
Absolutely real, designed by the former, one of the creators of the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, who now does online disruption at Meta. Wonderful human being. Quantum AI for your security analytic needs of the future. Juliana?
I'm going to say, I've heard of this, real, but too good to be true, if I can give a disclaimer.
Gary, thoughts?
I'm going to say fake on that. The way you described it is fake.
The way I described it is fake, but the term is real. So you both get points on this one. I feel like that's solid. Which one of these is not a security marketing acronym? XDR, NDR, ZDR, or EDR?
I'm going to go with NDR.
Gary, thoughts here?
ZDR.
ZDR is correct. That is the only one. And I actually had to spend about 10 minutes to make sure that I wasn't wrong there. So
no, I actually was going to go look at a website because I'm like, they may know better that might be using that.
Our quantum AI detection would have found your cheating, Gary, and it would have been embarrassing.
Yeah, exactly.
I was going to say Gary has a bit of an advantage over me, so
maybe a little bit on that one, but not at the other public sector.
It's a little bit on that one. SOAR bots, using bots to automate your SOC and elevate the mundane to the cloud.
SOAR bots. Fake.
Fake. Gary?
I'm going to do fake. I can imagine someone thinking that's a good idea, but like let's go with fake.
That is fake, and I am now concerned that I'm going to get scooped for RSA 2023. We're just going to see these all across the vendor floor.
Somebody's going to talk about that. Ryan, somebody's going to be talking about that.
It's going to be horrible. You know, we in the cybersecurity world love cognitive thought models because it sounds really smart and fancy. One of my favorite is we have a predilection to do geometric ones. And so which one of these geometric cognitive thought models is not real? Pyramid of Paine, Pyramid of Joy, Diamond Model, or the Octagonal Attribution Model?
I'm just going to pick one because I was a history major, whatever the diamond one was.
Gary?
Do your first two.
Pyramid of Paine or Pyramid of Joy?
Pyramid of Joy.
Yep, that is the fake one. That is the, oddly enough. And finally, which one of these is not a real threat actor group? Evil Corps, Deputy Dog, Dancing Murphys, Snake Mackerels, Inky Squid, Beagle Boys, Strong Pity, Cobalt Dickens, or Cactus Pete?
They sound like military operations.
They are all real. And it's one of the ridiculous things about the cybersecurity world. Those are all absolutely real names. One of them, Dancing Murphys, is named after a friend of mine who got up on his desk and danced when he found the adversary group. So there we go. And the final one here, this was actually written by Audra Streetman, one of the lovely hosts of Coffee Talk with Serge. Pick one which doesn't belong. Smishing, fly fishing, or vishing. This is your Cybersecurity Awareness Month training from October.
Fly fishing.
Fly fishing.
Fly fishing, Gary?
Fly fishing, yeah.
Also, that is correct. You two both did absolutely wonderful on this. I'm devastated fly fishing doesn't work. And once again, I do feel like we're going to see that at RSA coming up soon. So there we go. That's all we have time for today, mostly because Gary's a very busy man and it's 6 p.m. here where I am. So it's time to go have a glass of wine. Absolutely, really appreciate everyone joining. We will turn it back over to you, Ryan, for a more exciting Coffee Talk with Serge, and then hopefully see you all tomorrow at GovSummit in Washington, D.C. for the exciting keynotes and various other presentations throughout the day. So thank you very much for coming, both of you. Really appreciate the time, and we'll see everyone soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I tell you, Ryan, he is such a great man.
It is incredibly inspired like that. And you're talking about Kovar, right? The interview.
Yes, 100%. And not Gary Steele, who is a great man.
Our leader, fearless, driving everywhere we need to go. Thank you, Kirsty, for joining us. I hope you're joining remote Kovar for wine because it should be about 6 p.m. where you are right now.
It actually is,
not
right?
7.
Yeah. Your
Spoiler,
time
it was
traveling.
wine the whole time.
Start the rumors. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's been really fun.
Absolute pleasure. We will be back. We're going to take a holiday break.
The 3rd of January.
3rd of January.
Set your calendars. We're going to come back and a whole new 2023 full of more coffee talks. And we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
And hopefully, fingers crossed.
We have a Christmas.
Well, 2 years ago with SolarWinds, last year was log for show. And it sounds like there's a little bit of a fire brewing today. So
I
we'll
think it's
see
been
how
put
this
out.
plays out.
I was getting some excited texts during the show about breaking news cyber events, but it feels like we're in a good place. So until then, Kirsty, thank you so much for joining us. And Drew, why don't you take us away here? Let's roll the final. Surge.